All right. Hello, everyone. No, I am on time. So come on in. Come on in. So we're going to go ahead and get started because I'm a stickler for time and I don't want to keep all of you here past 30 minutes tonight. That's what I told myself. Only 30 minutes. So I know that I have a lot of new followers. So I am going to go ahead and start off by introducing myself. So, my name is Dr. Carrie Yazid, and I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm a cultural critic, and I'm also a 3 times best-selling author. I am the founder of I Think Change, which is a research agency. And what we do is we specialize in helping organizations and companies to figure out what isn't working, what is working, and where they can find solutions. What are the solutions that they need to their problems? We specialize in working with market research and also with employee satisfaction. So, if you are looking for an agency to come in, collect data, help you in those areas, I'm your girl, me and my team. So make sure that you hit us up to learn more about me, to learn more about the work that I do, and to also learn about the books that I have written. Make sure you visit my website. Y'all see what I'm pointing. drkiriazi.com. So tonight we are going to be discussing Black women and workplace trauma. So I guess some of you are wondering, like, okay, yeah, this is an issue. And then some people are kind of like, no, it's not an issue. Y'all just whining and complaining. And that's where I'd like to step in because I have heard a lot of people reference this as, when Black women start to talk about what it is that they are going through in the workplace, it is often negated. Their feelings are negated. What it is that they are saying is being negated. And people tell them stuff like, oh, you just need to get over it, girl, it's not that bad. And we're going to get into like where those comments actually come from and how that all plays into workplace trauma, especially when we are talking about, Black women in the workplace. So, first of all, let's start off with the definition of what exactly is workplace trauma. And so, workplace trauma is when someone is experiencing an injury that occurs in the workplace. Okay. And if you see me looking down, that's because I took notes because this is really important to me. And I want to make sure that, as my Sora would say, Danny Matthews, get the language right. And so it occurs when an individual experiences a traumatic event in the workplace. Okay. So workplace trauma means that an individual has experienced a traumatic event in the workplace. So that doesn't mean that it's just Black women. That means that anyone can experience workplace trauma. And again, I'm going to get into that as to why I'm specifically referencing Black women, because there is a reason. But not taken away from everyone else, workplace trauma is something that any of us can experience, and probably all of us have experienced and might not even be aware of it. So that's important. I want you to keep that in mind. So, and thank you for everyone who's come in. And if you've never been to one of my LinkedIn lives, because I haven't done one of these since April, please keep in mind that we try and be respectful in the comment section, but I do welcome feedback. I do welcome comments. If someone asks, feel free to answer. Okay, so we are here to all learn. So this isn't a dictatorship. We are all here. This is a democracy when it comes to learning. So we're all participating and we're all learning. So back to workplace trauma. So several examples of what can be considered workplace trauma. Now, I want you to listen to this and I want you to think about not just your current work experience, but think back. Think back to your first work experience. Think back to all the work experiences that you had up until now. Professional, gaslighting. So when that coworker makes comments about your work within hearing range, so you can hear them making a negative comment about you, but they're not saying it directly to you. They're saying it to someone else, but they're saying it so that you can hear it. Or they don't invite you to meetings that are critical to your job. I've definitely had that one happen where it's like I didn't realize they had a whole meeting about a class that I was teaching because they just failed to not invite me and then made decisions without me. That's a form of gaslighting. Harassment or bullying. How many of you have been bullied by a coworker? How many of you have been harassed, not just by a boss or a superior, but even another coworker? How many of you in academia have been harassed or bullied by students? Because that happens too. It's called contra power. Think about it. That is a form of workplace trauma. That's a form of workplace trauma. Someone said preferential treatment, passive aggressiveness. Yes. Microaggressions. Now, we all know about the microaggressions because that has kind of been where all the emphasis is being placed on microaggressions and the unconscious bias. But those aren't the only circumstances that can lead to or be considered workplace trauma. Those are the ones that right now are buzzwords that we are all talking about, but those aren't the only ones. So we have harassment, we have bullying, and we're not talking about passive. We're talking about people who are in your face bullying you where you're hyperventilating, you don't want to go to work, you're fearful, you're having anxiety attacks because of a coworker, colleague, a supervisor, or even someone who is underneath you, like in the case of a professor and a student. Being passed over for a job, not getting that promotion that you were supposed to get, that you were the most qualified person for. That's workplace trauma. What about unequal pay? Where are my ladies? Not just Black women, but women in general. Let's talk about unequal pay. Let's talk about this pay gap that exists. When you can't take care of your family and you're having to work 2 and 3 jobs because your main job, your 9 to 5, isn't enough to pay for your living expenses. And so you have to go and get another job, and then you've worked your butt off, you've done all the certifications, you went and got all the degrees you're supposed to get, and you still don't get that promotion. That's a form of workplace trauma. Think about it. Think about it. Am I describing you? Has this been you in the past? Think about it. What about being laid off or fired from your job? Who am I talking to? I have been laid off from a job out of the blue. You get a little severance package that might last a month or two. If you lucky, 6 months, but most people not giving out 6 month severance packages. That is a form of workplace trauma because it's not something that you anticipated. And now you have to figure out, like, you got to pivot quickly, figure it out. How are you going to get your bills paid on top of scrambling to try and find new employment? That is a form of workplace trauma. Think about it. Who's been there? Who has been fired? You walk in and you all happy. You got your coffee, you got your Dunkin' Donuts. It's about to be a good day. You get your pink slip. Now, and that was pre-pandemic. Now they're putting people on Zoom calls, like 100 people, and firing off everybody in a group meeting, or people getting fired via email. No warning. No warning. That is a form of workplace trauma. How many of you have ever had a colleague to die? Maybe not at work, but someone that you were close to and they passed away. That's a form of trauma. You have become used to seeing them every day, and now they are no longer there. Because grief is a form of trauma. Death and dying is a form of trauma. So think about it. And again, we know the microaggressions, we know the unconscious biases, we know the racial discrimination, we know the religion discrimination, we know the gender biases, we know about all of those. But these are the ones that happen usually in our daily occurrence at work. We don't give it a second thought. We don't even realize that we are experiencing some type of trauma within the workplace. So, what happens? What happens is that we become desensitized. We begin to get used to it. And so, we, over time, learn how to suppress the feelings that start to surface when we feel a coworker bullying us, when we feel ourselves being harassed, when we walk into the manager's office and they tell us we're not going to get that promotion. We push it down. And a lot of times, what we do, instead of labeling it as trauma, we blame ourselves. It was my fault. What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Then, surprisingly, what will happen is that you're going to go and you're going to try and have a conversation with someone, and they're going to tell you, girl, get over there. You're going to be fine. It is not that bad. It is not what you think it is. You're exaggerating. You're blowing this out of proportion. And so then what happens is that you decide that maybe it wasn't that important. And so you stop talking about it. And maybe it'll just go away. It doesn't go away if you never deal with it, it stays there. So I have talked about that piece. Okay. And someone said, please share this for replay. Yes, there will be a replay. So LinkedIn does shit. I normally save all of my videos on LinkedIn. So there will be a replay after this it stops airing. You will be able to watch it again. So I want in the comments, how many of you have gone through some of the things that I have mentioned? How many of you have experienced some type of workplace trauma and didn't even realize it? Like, just, give me a hand, give me a yes, amen, girl, that is me. We on the same page. Yes, I've had it happen. And let's see, we have Bethlehem said, we deserve better than this. This has to stop. I agree. I agree. Let's see. I was the victim of a failed armed robbery at a retail job, but the manager wouldn't call the cops or report it. I quit the next day. Y'all, like, this happens. This happens. And so we don't realize that it happens to so many of us because, again, society has taught us not to talk about it, to suppress our feelings, to suppress our experiences. So, we're not sitting in a support group. We're not getting therapy for this. When we try and talk to people, no one's listening to us. And so we think it's only us. And we don't realize what we have gone through has been traumatic. And so we suck it up. We put on a mask, we put on armor each and every morning and prepare to go back out into the workforce and make it happen. And you're going to make it happen. So, how does this tie in to specifically Black women in workplace trauma? So a lot of the workplace traumas that I mentioned do occur with Black women at a disproportionately higher rate. Last year alone, 60% of women in the workforce stated that they had experienced some type of discrimination, some type of harassment, some type of toxic work environment. 60% of Black women. So it happens to Black women at a higher rate than it happens to our counterparts. But again, it happens with everyone. Black women are just experiencing it more. They're getting it more. And you are right, Kimberly. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It stays there. And so unless you decide that, hey, I'm gonna be the like, I'm gonna quit this job, like we have heard someone say, um, unless you begin to do something, the situation is normally not going to change. But what makes workplace trauma even more severe or more significant or more detrimental for Black women, on top of what our counterparts go through, is that we have some other factors that come into play. So, those factors that we deal with, on top of the 9 to 5 toxic work environment and the trauma we're experiencing in the workplace, before we go to work, when we get off from work and trying to enjoy our evenings and then our weekends, we are also experiencing environmental traumas. We are usually faced with some type of racial discrimination that we are dealing with on a daily basis. Again, we don't talk about it, we just move through it. We are constantly traumatized every time we click on social media, especially Instagram and Twitter, and you see another Black person being killed by the police, or you see some type of trauma that has taken place, some event that has taken place, that by you witnessing it and being able to associate yourself with that individual that it has happened to, it becomes you experiencing a secondary trauma. It's kind of like secondhand smoke. Yeah, you're getting secondary trauma. It's still impacting you because you saw it. Not only do we have to deal with that, then we deal with our own personal issues, being followed in a store, not being approved for mortgages, being told we can only live in certain type of neighborhoods, redlining still exists. We also deal with historical trauma, and we deal with generational trauma that has been passed down from one generation to the next. One specific trauma that you all may or may not be aware of is post traumatic slave syndrome. And this basically is trauma that is passed down from one generation to the next generation, of a group of people who were enslaved. And that group of people is normally those who are descendants of Africans, Black American, Caribbeans, Black Caribbeans, Blacks who have been a part of the slave system, their descendants. Because what we have to realize, and this goes even deeper, is that yeah, we're all talking about going to therapy right now. But when we look at the number of available Black therapists, it's only 4%. In the United States, Blacks make up 4% of the mental health therapists. 4%. That's a pretty small number. Now, I know someone out there is going to be like, oh, that's just not it. Where's the data? Well, if you don't believe me, ASWB, which is the Association of Social Work Boards, this past weekend, they released data showing their test results over a certain time period. And the passage rate for Blacks on that test nationwide was the lowest out of all groups. So I know in the state of Louisiana, the passage rate was like 26 or 29%. and your whites was like at 76, 78%. So there's a big gap. That is not a coincidence. That is not because blacks who are going into mental health and to in the therapy and counseling and social work and all these other different fields, psychology, psychiatry, it's not because they are not educated. Because again, most of them aren't going to HBCUs. They're going to PWIs, primarily white institutions. So it's not that they're not getting the same education. It goes back to algorithms, and it goes back to people who are identifying as black being flagged and not passing the test. And it is of no consequence of their own. It's not because of their own actions. So we don't have a lot. So I said all of that to say this: we don't have a lot of black therapists out there. So you have blacks who are like, I can't find a black therapist. I need somebody who can relate to me and what it is that I am going through. Um, a lot of blacks are leery about going to therapy because you have the white savior complex. Again, you have someone who is white who comes in, their maybe socioeconomic status is some kind of superiority that they have, and they feel that they are the only ones who can come in and help you and save you. And again, blacks are still dealing with the trauma from slavery. So, because we have a limited number of black therapists, there's always been a limited number of black therapists. And the ones that we do have, they have a waiting list a mile long. Slavery was never dealt with. And so the traumas that blacks experience was just passed down from one generation to the next. And then on top of that, you had lynchings, you had Jim Crow taking place, we had the crack era come through that just demolished black neighborhoods that at one point was thriving. We had the Homestead Acts that came in that didn't provide funding to low income to blacks, because there wasn't no such thing as low income, it was just blacks. So there were a lot of things that were put in place that contributed to our historical trauma and contributed to our generational trauma. So you're dealing with the historical generational trauma. You're dealing with the workplace trauma from going to your 9 to 5. Then you're dealing with everyday racial discrimination, harassment, just living while black. So when a black woman is going into the workforce, she's already going to know that she's going to be experiencing all of these things at a disproportionate rate. That she, 9 times out of 10, we're thinking like, I'm not going to get the promotion. Like there's so much manifestation I can do. There's so much positive thinking, but I can't overthink racism. Like they're just not going to pick me. And so when you're dealing with that, plus you're dealing with unequal pay, plus you're dealing with all of the stuff that you deal with once you leave your job, plus you're dealing with stuff that has been passed down from one generation to the next, I think a lot of people wonder why we have these facial expressions of the angry black woman, the bitter black woman, the problematic black woman, the difficult to work with black woman. She's not a team player black woman. These are all the different factors that contribute to that a lot of times people do not take into consideration. What happens in corporate America is that they just see us in the here and now and in the present and how we are presenting, but they are not looking at all of the other environmental factors. They are not looking at the historical factors that are impacting that black woman. That's a lot. Someone just said, going to work is like going to war. Yes, it is. I have to agree, Sasha. And what we find ourselves doing it is again, every morning we get up, we put on a piece of armor, We pull out our shield, we get our band-aids, our protective gear to cover up the other wounds and the scars that we have. So now I can go and smile and deal with whatever you all throw my way, and then come home and mentally try and prepare myself to go through this all over again the next day. And yes, that is a great one. I cannot leave that one out as well. We got to think about colorism and being forced to compete with each other as Black women. We also have internalized racism that we as Blacks also deal with, and it is an issue. So we can't act like those are not factors as well. So I think what I want you all to understand is that when you run into the Black woman at work and she just looks like you like she just never smiles, she never looks happy, think about all of those things that she has to deal with. Like what are all the different things that she's having to deal with on a daily basis? Plus things, emotions and traumas that have been passed down to her that she doesn't even know she's dealing with. So some of the traumas that we experience, we don't even know that they are impacting us. We don't even know that they are a part of the problem. Um and so someone made a comment and said, what's the solution? And so the solutions are, there are layers to what the solutions are. A is really sitting down and becoming aware of what your traumas are. Hence why in the beginning I started to list out what are different types of workplace trauma. Because a lot of times we don't look at those situations as being trauma. We just look at them as that's a part of what happens in the workforce. Not realizing that if it's happening to you a lot, that's probably a workplace trauma that has something to do with some racial discrimination, which is another workplace trauma. So identifying what traumas have you been through? What have you gone through in your professional career that you have not dealt with, that you might still be holding on to 15 and 20 years later while you're still in the workforce? Finding a safe space where you can go in and start having these conversations. Because again, the other thing that I mentioned was we often try and talk to people. We try and talk to family members. We try and talk to girlfriends. You try and talk to your boss and tell them what's going on. And the majority of the time, your feelings are going to be negated. So you have got to find a safe space. That safe space can look like you working with a therapist. But again, therapists aren't, you don't wiggle your nose like, and as Genie one appears. That takes some interviewing, that takes some sitting down, getting to know someone, making sure that they're a good fit for you, you're a good fit for them. Again, I just mentioned some Blacks are just not going to be comfortable talking to someone who is outside of their race. So finding a Black therapist who has the availability to work with you, finding a support group, finding a safe space where when you go and you talk about what's going on, they listen and they validate how you are feeling and what it is that you are going through. Now, a lot of times therapy has been also frowned upon by Black families in the Black community. What goes on in this house stays in this house, where we kind of take that with us when we go to work. But again, I think that has to go back to the white savior complex and just being mindful of who you are sharing with. A lot of you have read my article about the dangers of courage culture and vulnerability in Brene Brown. And that comes from that space of being mindful of where you are sitting down and deciding to be vulnerable, who you are being vulnerable with. knowing when it is okay for you to be courageous. Black women cannot be vulnerable in the same environments as white women. If we go in and we start crying and snotting and talking about this is not fair and I don't appreciate how you're treating me, they're going to escort you out the building with the police, and you are going to be given a pink slip, because it is not going to be seen as you being vulnerable. You are going to be seen as aggressive. Even though you're expressing your emotions, you're going to be misunderstood. You are not going to be heard. So what you want to come out as being positive and people embracing that, that is not going to happen. That is not going to happen. And so, yes, um we have to create our own safe spaces, and we have to use opportunities to connect and continue the momentum beyond just me having this conversation. And I definitely agree. Kimberly stated about filing an EEOC complaint, and that is another solution, is that you can go to the EEOC. You can work with an employment lawyer or a civil rights lawyer. They don't go to a criminal lawyer. That's not the lawyer you need. You need a lawyer who specializes in employment law, and let them give you feedback if you're feeling like this is a lot. And usually, when you're feeling like that, you probably need to go start there first and sit down with an employment attorney and let them kind of map it out for you. So, but again, for us to start healing, that means that we got to start peeling back all those layers of trauma that we have experienced in the workplace, that we've experienced in our lifetime, because it's compounded. Start peeling it back, start dissecting it. How does it make you feel? Why are you feeling this way? Maybe are you having triggers? I had triggers. I mean, one of my experiences, and you can listen to it on my podcast, is just like if I heard a bell ring, I had a whole meltdown, anxiety attack, start shaking, ears start ringing. Yeah, I have PTSD. And so, yeah, and I have PTSD from workplace trauma. Um, but sometimes we have to realize that one thing I want you to walk away with tonight is that you don't have to have that armor on 24/7. You just got to figure out, as a black woman, where you can take it off, when you can talk about what it is that you're going through, who you can have those conversations with. It is not everyone. And so it is you developing, quote unquote, a safety plan. You figuring out who your village is, who are going to be the people who can safely help you to navigate what it is that you're going through, or what it is that you have gone through that might be prohibiting you from moving forward because you never dealt with the trauma. And so you're feeling stuck. You're feeling like you can't pivot, you can't move, you can't breathe. And so, how do you begin to process all of that? Because it has to be processed. You can't continue to just move through life and act like it's no big deal and it doesn't exist. You've also got to figure out how to get the naysayers out of your life. So those people who keep negating your experience, you need to figure out that's not someone you can go to. They're not going to listen, they're not going to be supportive. So stop putting yourself through that to know what the end result is going to be, that they're just going to blow you off. Like, just don't continue to do that to yourself. Um and one more thing I want to touch on too is, a lot of times our experiences are negated because people feel that black women have a high tolerance to pain. um Society believes that we can bear it all, that, and we know that if you've had kids, labor, medical conditions, our treatment is different. And so it is often assumed by the medical condition that we have a higher tolerance for pain. We don't. We don't. We're not the strong black woman, okay? But that myth comes from black women being used as experimental subjects during slavery by medical doctors with no anesthesia. So just let that sink in. And it's during slavery. So you can't scream. You got to sit there and bear it and be strong. So that mentality has trickled down throughout the years. Hence, why people think we can tolerate so much. We can tolerate the trauma. We can tolerate the disrespect. We can tolerate the pain because we have a high tolerance level. And many of us have bought into that myth, thinking we are the strong black woman. We're not. We're not. You're not. Understand where that comes from and why you might be treated the way that you are. So, again, someone said, with Dr. Yazid, what is the solution? So after I did the article on Brene Brown and the dangers of courage culture and vulnerability as it was being presented to the world, because it's being presented as this catch-all that it can help any and everyone, and it can't. We have to go into safe spaces. We can't be at work in the car in the break room talking about the trauma we didn't experience, because usually your oppressor, the person who put you through the trauma, is sitting right there. Okay, that's problem number one. And they are in a position where they are going to be viewed as the victim and not you, which makes all of that unsafe. And you can read the article to see how I unpacked it all. So, taking that and getting that common question of, well, Dr. Yazid, what do we do? What is the solution? What is there for Black women? I sat down and I thought about my own workplace trauma. And again, I break it down. I don't have enough time on LinkedIn tonight, but I broke it down in my recent podcast and I talked about my experience. It took me years to peel back the layers and do the work. I thought about my own journey, and as I was doing that, that article went viral. I realized that there was a need, and a lot of people didn't know what are the steps? What do I need to do? So, based on my experience and what I went through, I developed a workbook. And the workbook is called Unbreak My Soul: How Black Women Can Begin to Heal from Workplace Trauma. Because again, our trauma is different. We're dealing with all these other different factors that our white counterparts, our Asian counterparts, and some of our Hispanic counterparts, our Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, everyone's trauma is different. Their historical trauma is different. Their generational trauma is different. And so, how you peel back all those layers is going to be different for each group. So I'm specifically focusing on Black women because that's all I know. I'm a Black woman. I worked on me. And this workbook shares the tips and the steps and the activities that I use, on top of explaining a lot of stuff that we just take for granted, or we really don't see how it plays into what we have taking place in our lives, like how all of this stuff just comes together and makes it that much more significant or that much more severe. So right now, the workbook is actually going to come out in September. I am doing pre-orders. If you like to pre-order your copy, you get 20% off of the retail price, and it'll be an autographed copy from me. And so pre-orders are going to end next week, and then after that, you just got to wait until it's released to the general public. So again, all the books are going to be shipped out in mid-September. But if you are looking for a solution and you are finding that the Brene Browns of the world, the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world, and the Gabriel Bernsteins of the world, and all the rest of them are not helping you to deal with what it is that you're going through, or you're taking in their material, but you're still not being successful. You're still feeling broken. You're still feeling like what's next. Then I highly advise that you grab a copy, pre-order a copy. Again, it's Unbreak My Soul. It's based on my experience as a Black woman who has gone through workplace trauma and the steps that I took to heal, what I went through, what worked for me. So no pressure. Now, if you watching this and you like, A, I don't have no workplace trauma. B, I'm not a Black woman. You have a coworker. You have a coworker who is going through some workplace trauma right now. And if you are of another ethnicity and you're not Black, you got a Black female coworker that's going through some stuff right now. If you want to help that sister, get her a copy. That might be the best thing you do, because the Starbucks is not working. The Dunkin' Donuts is not working anymore. The lunch dates, that ain't working. That sister needs help. In Unbreak My Soul, one thing that I found was very valuable is that I also added a work diary to it, where you can document what is taking place with you in the workplace each and every day. There are also some incident reports where you can fill out when something doesn't feel right. You can actually fill out a report so you'll have the details. So if you have to go and have a conversation with an employment attorney, you have everything that you need in your workbook, because that workbook's going to stay with you. That's not something you're going to be leaving at work, but it'll have all of the documentation that you need if you had to have a case. So the price, Kimberly, again, you can go to the link, Unbreak My Soul. The price right now is 24. I want to say, yeah, $24 right now is the price. So again, I hope that you all will consider it. If nothing else, I hope that the information that I have shared tonight gets you to thinking, that you are starting to think about your situation, where you are, how you've been feeling, especially with all that we're going through, inflation, tech companies laying people off at the drop of a dime, but just stuff that we're seeing in the news, what has taken place over the last 2 years when it comes to race relations in the world, not just in America. Compounded with your personal life, look at your work experiences and just use the information, if nothing else, that I've shared with you today. Have you experienced workplace trauma? Are you experiencing workplace trauma? Are you dealing with some generational trauma in your family that has never been dealt with? Some historical trauma that have come down from your ancestors that you've never dealt with? I want you to look at all of it. And if you answer yes to any of the things that I have mentioned tonight, yeah, you got some trauma taking place as a Black woman, and it is impacting you in the workforce in addition to your personal life. So, again, if you like to get a copy of the book, all you got to do is visit unbreakmysoul.com, or you can visit my website. And again, my website is drcarrieIZ.com. Go to the tab that says books, and then you'll see where you can actually pre-order the book there. So again, you can go to my website, or you can go to unbreakmysoul.com. Yes, have a URL for the book. So that is it for tonight. But if any of you have any additional questions after I end tonight, or if you're watching the replay, please leave your comments. I do go back and I read the comments. I can't reply to the comments directly on StreamYard, but I can go back on LinkedIn later. or you can send me a DM, or you can also email me. And my email is drkiriyazid@gmail.com. So, again, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. I hope that this live has been informative, and I hope that it helps somebody. And I hope that if nothing else, it has answered some questions that you may have had. And it's allowed you to see that there is hope, and that you don't have to continue to live the way that you have been living. So, again, my name is Dr. Kiri. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And if you like more of me off of LinkedIn, make sure you follow me over on Twitter. So, hope everyone has a good night, and I will see you next time.